finally, I had a carpet put in my office. For the first time in 22 years, I had carpet in my office now. And they took my computer all apart, and when we put it back together, now it's doing funny things. So that might have been the problem the other day with the images disappearing. I don't know. Anyway, it took me a while to save my file for today. But computer line is good. Happy time. Sunshine. So we left off. We were doing the urinary system. We had rocked through the nephron, parts of the nephron, and we left off, I believe, right around here, where we were talking about the air, the secretion, and the absorption that's taking place. The thing I wanted to try to emphasize to you was the direction for secretion and absorption. Because remember, if we secrete, that means we're taking something out of the blood and putting it into the urine. It's something that we forgot to get rid of, or that just didn't come out in the glomerulus. So filtration in the glomerulus squeezes out most of the plasma. But if there's something in there that we didn't put into the urine, we will secrete it in. So that's what all of these pink boxes are showing. We're coming from the peritubular blood into the urine. And then the blue boxes are whatever's in the urine that we decide, well, maybe we want to hold on to that. So we reabsorb it back into the body to keep it. And so I wanted to emphasize there's an awful lot going on at the proximal convoluted tubule. Seems like most of the secretion and absorption is occurring there. And I think the direction of those mostly makes sense. After that, you're really looking at water. Water is listed everywhere. And you're looking mainly at ions for the rest of the path. So you don't really have to memorize a ton on this one. But I do want you to be familiar with what's going on at different parts. So any questions on that section? Last bit of the nephron? Okay, then let's continue. So at the end of this, after we've taken out what we wanted, put in what we wanted, remember the urine is going to be dripping from those collecting ducts and go all the way down to the papilla. So next week we're going to have our practical, and we're going to see parts of the nephron, parts of the kidney. So we're going to see those medullary pyramids. At the tip of each pyramid, that's what we call the papilla. So whatever drips out of there is urine. Okay? And we can't mess with it anymore. All we can do is transport it and store it. So from there we'll go into minor calyx. From the minor calyces we form into major calyces. The major calyces form a renal pelvis. The pelvis funnels down to form a ureter. And then the two ureters come down into the bladder. So in all of that tube system, the walls are too thick to do anything else to the urine, but cannot be changed. Then from the bladder, when it's the appropriate time, we will release the urine through the urethra. Single urethra and pair of ureters. So all that nephron business was really critical. That's our only chance. But we got lots of chances there, right? That's why we have that long, funny tube system. So we have lots of chances to make the urine exactly the way we want it to be. So we could really come up with a pretty good definition of what urine is at this point. Urine would be everything that was filtered and secreted, but not taken back, not reabsorbed. Everything that was filtered and secreted into the nephron, but not reabsorbed. That's what the urine is. That's all you got left. So one more time, it's everything that was filtered and secreted into the nephron, but not reabsorbed. That's a good working definition for what urine is. So when we see what urine really is, the composition of it, over on page 919, there's a nice little table that tells you what are the typical components of urine. So you don't really have to memorize the whole table, but I do want you to look at it and note the pH range for one. For two, look at the various units of things. There are some big and some small numbers until you look at the units. Okay? And then you realize if you're looking at micro this or milli that. So definitely check those out for a little bit. Besides water, what are the major components? Look in that table and see if you can tell me what are the major components of the urine besides water. We know water is a huge one. Obviously, it is the main component. And double check. When you look at that table, do you see any signs of cells? Do they list any cells in that table? So I want you to just spend a couple minutes looking at that table briefly. See if you can answer those questions. the top of the table, it lists how much urine per day. Check out that table, page 919. All right? So, from here we can talk about the rest of the path for just a couple of minutes to finish out the chapter. We know what's going on in the kidneys. We know how we're going to produce this urine. We know how it's going to travel down through the ureters into the bladder. So now the next question is, okay, the anatomy from here and the physiology from this point on. So the anatomy you looked at in lab. Right, you saw it when I covered it and when Sarah covered it. You saw it in the video, and now you're seeing it one more time. Here's our nice bladder. It would never look like that if it was empty. Okay, it's got transitional epithelium on the inside. It's got muscle on the outside. So it would collapse. It's like a balloon. It wouldn't be blown up like this. So it should be full of urine if they want to show it that big. Normally, it would be collapsed down. There's smooth muscle in the wall of this. That's what they labeled detrusor muscle. That's just the name for the smooth muscle, but it's smooth muscle. How is smooth muscle controlled? Is it somatic or autonomic? Autonomic, right? Autonomic. It's our involuntary system. Okay. You'll notice down here at the neck of the bladder, there's a little extra ring of muscle, the internal sphincter. So it is a sphincter. It controls keeping that urine in the bladder until it's the appropriate time to let it move. That is also smooth muscle. The internal sphincter is smooth muscle. Now they're showing the male here. We'll look at the female in just a second. But when we notice in the male, the urethra, the first part of the urethra actually passes through a separate gland, the prostate gland. Ladies don't have a prostate gland. So we refer to that as the prostatic urethra. The prostate we'll see a little bit later. Probably on Friday, we'll see that the prostate adds fluids to the semen. Right? So it's going to contribute to the semen. And this is where it contributes. There's tons and tons of little open ducts in the prostatic urethra. From there, at the bottom of the prostate, now we pass through this nice little layer of muscle here. That muscle is skeletal muscle. It's skeletal muscle. And there's a separate little sphincter around the urethra there. That's what we call the external sphincter. Since it's made of skeletal muscle, is it controlled by the somatic or the autonomic nervous system?
Somatic.
Somatic, right? It's voluntary. Voluntary control there. They even give this part of the urethra a little separate name. They call it the membranous part. Personally, I hate that name. I'd call it the muscular part because it's passing through muscle. Passing through the muscle there. But that little bitty spot right there is a membranous urethra. From there, now we pass into the penis. So now it's penile urethra. And we saw the three erectile bodies of the penis, and we noted there were paired corpora cavernosa, but then an unpaired corpus spongiosum. The spongiosum is the one that houses the urethra. So you'll see two names for the urethra. You'll see it just called penile urethra or spongy urethra, for the last part of the urethra of the guys. There's our simple pathway. If we compare that to what's going on in the ladies, very similar path. There's just no prostate, no penis. We still have the same general pattern. We're going to have two ureters dumping down into the bladder. At the neck of the bladder, we're going to have an internal sphincter. We're going to have muscle all around this bladder. All of that is smooth muscle. Since there's no prostate here, we don't really give it a separate name. In fact, the entire urethra of the ladies is usually only maybe an inch or so. It's not a very long pathway. So we just say urethra. We don't worry about membranous or prostatic or penile, because two of those don't apply. So we just have a single urethra here. It still passes through a sheet of muscle, just like it does in the guys. And the muscle out here is skeletal muscle. So they're still the same basic setup. Ladies have an internal sphincter and an external sphincter. The internal is smooth muscle. The external is skeletal muscle. Right? So we'll look at how this is all controlled then. So when we look at the control up on page 923, as you see, you have a little box around this one, so I must think it's a little more important than the average picture there. And when we look at this control, this isn't so bad. It should make some sense to us. is, first of all, we're going to have sensory nerves in the wall of our bladder. And those sensory nerves have stretch receptors on them. So same thing as what we saw in the stomach, actually, is as your bladder fills, we're going to start to stretch the wall a little bit. So at a certain point, these neurons fire. They send action potentials back to the spinal cord. Look where they go back. Between S2, 3, and 4. S2, 3, and 4. Typically, that's where most of us send our signals back. So we come in through somewhere around S2, 3, 4, and then we're going to definitely send a signal up to the brain to let the brain know what's going on. But look what happens at the same time, and quicker, mind you, is there's a divergence here, and there's going to be a reflex. There's going to be a reflex loop that comes out. This isn't unlike stretching your quadriceps muscle. And certainly there's a signal to the cord, and it goes up to the brain, and you know somebody just tapped your knee, but before that even happened, you already reflexed. Right? You already contracted. Same thing here. But this comes back, and it's a parasympathetic reflex. Still motor, right? Sympathetic and parasympathetic were motor signals. So it's still a motor signal out, sensory signal in, quick motor signal out. And this signal is going to be passing through those pelvic splanchnic nerves. They didn't label that here. They just said parasympathetic. But we know the pelvic splanchnic nerves were the ones carrying signals from S2, 3, 4 out to the urogenital organs and the bottom part of the intestines. So that'd be a worthwhile thing to add here. Parasympathetic ganglion, yeah, who cares? Point is, these are pelvic splanchnic nerves. So they're going to tell the smooth muscle in the wall of the bladder, you were being stretched. The natural response is, okay, contract. Start to contract. And then notice there are also signals to that internal sphincter, telling it to relax. It's normally contracted. There's always a little bit of parasympathetic tone there telling it to stay contracted. But in this case, now, actually a sympathetic tone telling it to stay contracted. But the parasympathetics now come down and tell it to start to relax. So this is the point where you really feel like you have to go. Because now some of that urine in here is going to actually start to pass down the urethra. It doesn't pass very far, maybe an inch or so, in the boys and the girls. Okay, so we'll pass into the prostatic urethra in the guys, or just in the rest of the urethra in the ladies. It's about the same distance. But fortunately, we still have the skeletal muscle sphincter that's under voluntary control, still keeping things closed. Right, so we'll still try to keep that closed until our brain decides, okay, now's the appropriate time to relax that sphincter and to urinate. So this part here is coming through a different nerve. It's also coming from S2, 3, 4, but this particular nerve is referred to as a pudendal nerve. Did I talk about pudendal nerve in lab?
I think it was last semester.
But last month.
Last semester.
Oh, last semester, okay, so we did pudendal nerve, so that which should be covered, right? That's what it roughly translates as. So this is the nerve to that which should be covered. So it actually goes to the sphincter, but also to the external genitalia, both sexes. So this little pathway here is the one that hasn't developed in newborns and young children. So that's why they're wetting the bed or wetting their pants all the time, so they've got to have diapers on for a while, until they learn to do this control. Otherwise, this is built in. This reflex is there. So as they drink or eat, whatever fluid is collecting in their bladder, if it gets to a certain point, boom, that's it. We reflexly open this up and urinate. So we have to learn that control over the first couple of years of life. And then kind of interesting, but you know, as you get older and older, you seem to lose that control again. Kind of become childlike. So you see a lot of these people in nursing homes, they tend to lose that voluntary control. You see the commercials now for all the double diapers and things. It's just kind of weird. I don't know if we're living too long or not. You know, we're kids, we grow up, and then we get to the point where we start turning back into kids. Okay, that's philosophical. So, are we cool on the control? I've never understood why we want to use this other word here. We always say urination medically, but you see, micturition. Micturition is an alternate medical term for urination. I don't really know a good difference between the two words, so I'm just going to say they're interchangeable. Urination or micturition. So now we know how to get that urine produced by the nephrons, how to pass it into the bladder, and then how we control it.